morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Lisa Coleman, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation here at NYU. And I use she and her pronouns. I hope that everyone is taking very good care. We're thrilled to welcome you to our Transformation Talk series, where we spotlight leaders to learn from their journeys and gain knowledge about how to be agents working toward transformational change across our organizations. In OGI, we engage global inclusion, diversity principles with an intersectional focus on nimbleness, inclusivity, resilience, transformation, the growth mindset, design thinking, and adaptivity in all of our work. Transformation Talks is part of our NYU Be Together initiative, centering on innovating, transforming, and acting together. Today, we have the distinct honor of welcoming and being in conversation with Dean Julie Mostov. Dean Mostov joined NYU in August 2017 as the first woman dean of liberal studies, bringing years of experience in global engagement, deep grounding in the liberal arts, and a commitment to interdisciplinary research and teaching. In addition to her many scholarly achievements, Dr. Mostov spearheaded a wide range of global initiatives and international research and academic partnerships for Drexel University as the Senior Vice Provost of Global Initiatives and Professor of Politics, and earlier as the Director of International Area and Women's Studies. She has been a longtime member of the University of Bologna's network on Europe and the Balkans, and a regular visiting professor in its graduate programs. A political theorist by training, Dean Mostov is a well-known scholar on Southern Eastern Europe. Her research explores notions of soft borders and transnational citizenship, and focuses on politics of national identity, sovereignty, citizenship, and gender. Publications related to these themes include her book, Soft Borders, Rethinking Sovereignty and Democracy, the co-edited volume From Gender to Nation, and book chapters such as Soft Borders and Transnational Citizens, and Our Women/Their Women, Symbolic Boundaries, Territorial Markers, and Violence in the Balkans. And other thought pieces such as Populism in Always Gendered and Dangerous for Women and Democracy. And she has also presented her disciplinary research with a focus on Southern Eastern Europe at universities and conferences across the globe. She has served as a consultant for both the US and the EU during the breakdown of Yugoslavia and designed and implemented State Department grants in support of democratic transitions and women's leadership in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Her earlier scholarship in democratic theory includes work such as Power, Process, and Popular Sovereignty, Endangered Citizenship, and Democracy, the Politics of National Identity. In addition to her academic engagements, Dean Mostov has been a longtime activist and advocate for women's rights, serving among other roles as the chair of the Board of Women Against Abuse, Pennsylvania's largest agency addressing domestic and intimate partner violence. She is the recipient of major awards for advocacy to end gender-based violence from Women Against Abuse and Women's Way. And it is an honor and a privilege to work with her as one of our deans here at NYU. Her education is from New York University, her PhD, her MA from the University of Belgrade, and her AB from Mount Holyoke College. And it is a pleasure to be in conversation with you today, Dean Mostov. So let's jump into the questions. I'd like to begin, as I do with all of our guests, and we are featuring as part of this Transformation Talk series, as an accomplished leader and respected leader, and of course, change agent. And as we know, as we heard, you're outside of even your academic engagements. And given the ever-changing educational landscape with which we know you're very familiar, how do you think about progress and transformation within the context of your work across global liberal studies, thinking about this idea, right, of national identities and the shifts therein, and of course, gendered powered relationships?
Right. So thank you, Lisa. It is wonderful to be here and to take part in these conversations and continue our collaboration together. I measure success now by changes in the ways in which we study, understand, and expose global relationships of power, interrogating hierarchical structures of power and privilege, that is putting on gender and intersectional lenses to see the historical, complex roots of contemporary challenges, such as colonialism, enslavement, violence at the borders, enforced mobility, and immobility. For me, then, progress or success is disruption. As John Lewis said, making good trouble. Empowering others to embrace different ways of knowing and learning. So when a student says to me, wow, I hadn't thought about this way of looking at a problem, or reading this text has really opened my eyes, I'm thrilled.
Absolutely. What a wonderful, wonderful way to underscore the learning process. And of course, this idea of disruption, which we know here, certainly in higher education, we hope that we're able to transform and think about, as you said, different ways of knowing, and of course, different ways of producing knowledge. So, as you know, and through our collaborations in our office, we work across all the university campuses, disciplines, and fields, and we try to think about how do we support global leaders, our emerging leaders, our students, as you just referenced, and thinking about those core strengths and skills, right, that allow people to move, whether that's into the professoriate, or as you said, even to get into good trouble, right? So how would you suggest we think about emerging leaders remaining, right, nimble and agile to realize the kind of change that you just referenced, right, and disruptions of hierarchical and power relations, et cetera?
Well, first of all, we have to really help build confidence. Confidence in our abilities, in our faculty, in our staff, ability in who they are and what they bring to the table. Fear of failure, of vulnerability, uncertainty, insecurity is what keeps us back, what hampers us, and allows others to put us down. So confidence is critical, and giving that space to others to develop that confidence. Acknowledgement of our positionality, questioning what we know, what we think we know, openness to different narratives, ability to listen to different voices, and recognize systems and structures of oppression, and even more important, the traumatic impact that those structures have on one another. Eagerness to collaborate in a spirit of mutual respect, giving credit to others. That, from my point of view as a leader, in addition to transparency, which I think we all know, is so critical in really empowering others to do, that is, good trouble. And
that's so great, and absolutely right, to give people confidence, et cetera, you have to have reciprocity in those collaborative relationships, right? And so thank you for emphasizing that, because I think far too often we think about collaboration and there's one dominant partner in a collaboration versus that reciprocity and respect across those differences. Right. And thanks for emphasizing listening, because listening is so important, and we know if you're gonna build confidence and be open to other people's vulnerabilities, you actually have to listen to where they are. So yeah,
I know, and that isn't easy, especially for us. We're used to lecturing, talking, but in fact, where we really succeed is when we listen and respond and acknowledge the other.
Thank you so much. We're going to move a little bit now into your leadership journey. And because as we know, we have a lot of emerging leaders out there. And so they also, people learn from other people's, I think some of the best of higher education is we learn from one another. So one of the things that I love about higher education is this transgenerational engagement that you've already referenced, right? And the collaboration that occurs across generations. And I often laugh as corporate people talk about 4 or 5 generations in their workforce. I'm like, we have sometimes 8, right? We have the 14-year-old geniuses and the people who are still 90, right, in the classroom. So a friend of mine asked this question, and it's a question that I sometimes ask myself, right? What would your 8-year-old self think of you today?
You know, I was thinking about this question as I listened to some of the other transformation talks, and I remembered a significant moment in my journey when my 10-year-old self was auditioning for the yearly Nutcracker in Toledo. And once again, I was cast in the role of the mouse, not a snowflake on point. So I got up my courage and I asked the director why. And she said, "Tell your mother to join the Toledo Ballet." There was my first lesson in power and politics. And so, or as we say in Philadelphia, as we said in Philadelphia, pay to play. So, yeah. So rather than a great career on the stage as a ballerina, I turned to politics and uncovering relationships of power that undermine access, equity, opportunities, and deprive people of the dignity of persons, rights, and mobility in many cases. So I guess that my 10-year-old self would be pretty proud of.
Way to go.
Beyond pay to play.
Right, way to go, little Julie out there. Asking the hard question. I love it. And I think that's so important because the challenges that we have to negotiate through our career, right? I have a friend who says that we spend a lot of time, some of the things that we learn as children are some of the things that we learn how to negotiate. And so I think it's so important you bringing up, right? Pay to play and the power that you were able to recognize even in that space. So as you think about the arc of your career, what is something that you're most proud of? Something that you think, oh my goodness, I'm just so glad I was able to, or I was there, as you think about your career and your leadership roles?
Yeah. So in the wake of the violent breakdown of Yugoslavia and the ethnic conflicts there, with the help of women leaders in Philadelphia, I got a number of State Department grants to support women in the opposition in Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Croatia. Later, just Serbia and Montenegro as politics changed. And during the women's first visit, we had many to Philadelphia. The US began bombing Belgrade. Just imagine, in the hopes of stopping the violence in Kosovo. So the press immediately began calling, and the women from Kosovo, from Serbia, from Montenegro began frantically calling, and their families trying to figure out if they were okay. And we needed, though, to come together, and we managed to do so. And in fact, with public radio, we were actually able to help others, that is the public, understand the multidimensional aspects of the conflict and not the simple ancient hatreds, which is the explanation, of course, that the media always gives. to mask the really deep and structural roots of violence in our larger economic and social systems of power. And so this was, the ability to do that and to bring these women together. And then a year later, to bring the women from Philadelphia to the region, to meet many of them in their communities and to engage in real collaboration around moving forward as advocates and activists for women's rights was just amazing. So that was something I'm still excited about when I think.
That's phenomenal. It goes back to some of the things that you talked about before, building confidence, empowering others. Terrific, just terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking about that, because I think, right, to use examples of exactly the things that you've talked about earlier. As you know, across our office and the kind of work that we do, and as much research demonstrates, one cannot have innovation, right, without thinking about these principles of global inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and belonging. And so as you think about, right, both ends of that sort of equation, as it were, what role has innovation played in your work? And as you think about the global implications of your work at NYU and beyond, and your experiences in global politics, nation building, working on these important issues, which you've already referenced in terms of thinking about gender equity, right, and even addressing issues of power and violence, and considering, as you already also talked about, ongoing and future disruptions, pandemics, fiscal downturns, et cetera. How has and does innovation link to leadership, planning, readiness, right? And to some degree, as you've already said, good trouble?
Yes, thank you for that question. From my point of view, collaboration and innovation go hand in hand. And I try to be a kind of yes leader and believe in yes leadership. That's a kind of glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. And so when somebody comes and has an idea, instead of saying, well, I'm not sure what kind of resources we have and so on, the answer is, let's see what we can do. And this really was the spirit of innovation and collaboration that happened in liberal studies during the pandemic, when we had to pivot to online work and teaching and life, and in the wake of the horrible murder of George Floyd and the protests, recognizing violence, police violence, continuing violence against Black, Brown, Indigenous bodies. And so we came together and the faculty created a number of committees and creative responses in which we collaborated with the Office of Global Inclusion, such as our Black Lives in Global Context series, connecting our understanding and support of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also our commitment to global. And then engaging with Office of Global Inclusion, again, in celebrating those women's voices that are often left out of the story of the 100-year anniversary of the vote, gaining the vote. And so we collaborated on such series as Untold Herstories, Conversations in Film, the Transnational Feminist Conference, and many more. And even then, one of our faculty members who was teaching through the Go Local program for our students in China brought her expertise on Jamaica and her experience teaching the students in China together with a series on Jamaican artists and writers of Chinese descent, collaborating again with OGI, but also with NYU's Global Asia Network. And so this is truly what I think is the connection between innovation and collaboration taking these moments of conflict and challenge and making them into positive opportunities for change.
Thank you so much. I think that goes back, right? Thanks for being a yes leader, for thinking about the opportunities and have
Right.
full, right? I think, and thank you for the collaboration. I think that's exactly right on point. And providing the opportunities for faculty, for students, for that sort of those synergies to come together in ways that, right, do, instead of placing limitations. And I think you said it at the beginning, what can we do together? And so, and it's a pleasure to be able to work with you in this space about thinking about what we can do together. So we're going to move into, I can't believe it's our last question for this conversation. Given your leadership journey, and we think about leadership journeys and again, emerging leaders, could you share a piece of advice that you wish you had known or been given or something like that earlier in your career? And then the second part of this question is, and talk about something that sustains you or gives you joy. Because sometimes, right, I think emerging leaders think, oh, you just get there and then you just stay there, right? So talk to us about how you actually stay there, right? And think about that sustainability and of course something that gives you that sort of pleasure versus just the challenges.
Right. Thanks. So I would say, of course, transparency. I think we've all learned our lessons that if a leader is not transparent and open, she will not succeed. I think, we know importance of that. But something that I really, may not have heard enough was be open to opportunities and grab them. Opportunities for scholarship, advocacy, and activism. I bring those all together. They're inseparable for me, and I think for many leaders. Out of my attempts to make sense of the breakup of Yugoslavia, I turned to the study of borders and began to look at the ways in which so many officials and politicians were looking at hard border solutions, closing, excluding, and returning to ethno-nationalisms. And I took this as a moment to try an alternative, to think about softening borders, rejecting hard border approaches, considering ways of inclusive polity and transnational citizenship to undermine the violence of statelessness and forced mobility or immobility. And this really opened up another world for me and an important way of bringing my scholarship and activism together in struggling against the hard borders of exclusion. Now, it sounds like, and even my book, Soft Borders, sounds like a bit of a fairy tale. But I think that we need to push the boundaries of the possible and to think and act boldly. And I guess this connects to the question you asked me, what brings me joy? When I see others taking up this challenge and being ready to push the boundaries, to act and think boldly. This gives me enormous joy and keeps me going in those difficult times.
Oh, I can't think of a better way to come to the end of this conversation, to think about pushing the boundaries of possibility and others taking up these challenges to act, think, disrupt, produce new knowledge. Thank you so much, Dean Mostov. It is a pleasure to work with you, to be in collaboration on the many, many things and new possibilities that I'm sure we will explore in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for all the work that you do It's a pleasure working with you and having the resources of the Office of Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation.
Thank you so much. I hope that you all, everyone out there, has enjoyed this conversation. We will continue to have these conversations, and please join us for additional events. We hope that you will follow our office, our website, follow social media, and of course, continue to take an opportunity to participate in these Transformation Talk series. Thank you again to everyone out there for your partnership and your collaboration in our efforts to advance institutional excellence around global inclusion. Please again, continue to take good care, and we look forward to the next time for us to be in these important conversations.